So there we were, 500 people arrested for terrorism offences on that day, and the police are saying none of us are troublemakers.
It's just ridiculous. They're conflating protest with terrorism.
I shall not agree to pay a fine. I shall not agree to community service. I may be sent to prison. That's okay, if that's what the state decides.
I'm a supporter of Defend Our Juries, and I got involved with it having followed the work of Palestine Action after, or when it became apparent that they were going to be prescribed, which is of course a ludicrous and, to be honest, self-defeating action on the part of the government.
The invitation was to sit on the ground silently, to hold a placard that says, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action."
We were asked to be silent for an hour meditatively, and as a Christian I would see this as a time of prayer.
It is not about chanting, it is not about being aggressive, it is not about hurling insults at people. It is about demonstrating our will to speak and express our opinions that to ban Palestine Action is wrong and that to support genocide is wrong. So that's what you do. And then after an hour or so, things relaxed a little bit more, and you can have the odd chat with journalists or with people sat around you. But the ultimate thing is to remain calm, peaceful, and well ordered.
I was very struck by the peacefulness and dignity of those who were sitting on the ground holding signs waiting to be arrested. An amazing group of people whose courage was really humbling to see.
Eventually, whether that's after 5 minutes or, as is the case with me, after about 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, they tend to keep me till last quite often for some strange reason. The police will come along and arrest you for carrying a sign that says, "I oppose genocide and I support Palestine Action."
So people who support terrorist organisations are deemed to be terrorists themselves. I think over 2,000 people have been arrested for this action.
At the beginning, I didn't really believe that a genocide was taking place. I do now, but I didn't know enough about it.
I think it's outrageous that in the week that after we were arrested in September, there was an arms fair in London at which 5 Israeli arms manufacturers were exhibiting their lovely, shiny weapons. We have to either take an ethical stand about this, or it's no wonder that so many people in the world think we're just hypocrites and liars because it's one law for us and another law for other people. We're a founding nation in the Nuremberg Principles. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Hamas, whether it's the Israeli Defense Force, whether it's even our own army. If people commit war crimes, then we have to take action and support international efforts to bring people to justice over that. Otherwise the law's a joke. And it's crazy that our government would spend so much time arresting people for holding up signs and placards and do so little to prevent the murder of tens of thousands of people, including thousands of children. We were reading out the names on All Souls Day of some of the children from Gaza who've died. And after 3 hours, we hadn't even got past the ones aged 2. I mean, it's such an appalling stain on all our human consciences, which is why I felt I had to do something about it.
What prompted me to do this, and I must say it's out of character. My politics isn't usually direct action of any kind or civil disobedience. What prompted me is first and foremost the scale of the genocide, what was being done by the State of Israel, apparently in my name.
The level of deprivation, the level of inhumanity that the Israeli state, and backed by our government and the US government in particular, but other countries as well, has forced upon the people of Palestine. It's the genocidal inhumanity of starving children to death, of punishing people by killing them and injuring them when they go out for food, by essentially setting out to dehumanize and destroy a population.
Well, Jesus said, inasmuch as you did it to one of these little ones, you did it also to me. And I think when we see the images and hear the names of the children killed in Gaza, every single one of those, we've murdered the image of God. We are murdering a sacred treasure in every child, every civilian that dies in Gaza or anywhere else for that matter. It's a crime against God as well as against humanity.
Jews like myself want to sit there alongside others to show that Jewish people know what genocide is like. They know why you have to stand up to oppose genocide. And it should be the obligation of every citizen, including every Jew, to look squarely at what's happening to the Palestinians and then oppose it because they're Jews.
I often wondered how it was that the German people allowed the Nazis to do what they did. At least they had the semblance of an excuse that they didn't know. This is the first televised, live-streamed genocide in history. You have no excuse.
I just think the situation there is appalling, that there's overwhelming evidence that there are war crimes, crimes against humanity having been committed, and we just can't be associated with that.
Whether it's our government allowing information to be gathered via flights going from our air bases in Cyprus, through using aircraft that we have allowed Israel to have built over here in the UK, through the big arms manufacturers that they are using to perpetuate their inhumane war, and the data gathered by those jets that we are allowing to fly from Cyprus is then being used systematically to identify and kill Palestinians.
Will he also explain what role Britain has played in overflying Gaza with surveillance aircraft?
I am very comfortable with the support that we give to Israel, and I won't comment on operational issues.
It would be fair to say the UK has been at war alongside Israel with the Palestinians through supply of intelligence, supply of weaponry. So, and I think the people of this country just simply don't know the depths of the involvement of the British state.
It does seem, some of it is personal. I think the Prime Minister is deeply committed to the Zionist cause.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sakir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
And it seems that the government is genuinely committed to the state of Israel. Plus, it is the policy of the United States. And the government is also genuinely committed not to let a cigarette paper come between their policy and that of the United States on issues of such significance as Israel.
Where's the United Kingdom? Where's our friend? Come here. Is everything going good?
Very good.
It's very nice that you're here. These people all came in like 20-minute notice.
Where America goes, Britain tends to follow. And it's really turned our worldview upside down. And people of my generation find it extremely hard to believe it. But it's true, it's out there, it's happening.
We're the closest of nations, and we had very good discussions today, but we didn't discuss Canada.
Thank you.
This is the headquarters, the office of Elbit Systems. They supply 85% of the drones and weapons that are used in Israel against the Palestinian people.
What the fuck, man? This is so unsafe what you did.
Well, as I say, it was more, to start with, it was more the proscription of Palestine Action, being labelled terrorists, because as far as I knew, they didn't fit the definition of terrorism at all. These young people who whose hearts are in the right place, who want to stop a genocide.
Now, Palestine Action is, as you probably know, it's done about 300 actions, I think. These have been designed to sabotage weapons industries, Elbit in particular, in Bristol, where I join quite often the Quakers. We stand outside Elbit in a silent vigil holding a banner saying, "Stop arming Israel." But other weapons factories too that are making the weapons that are then sold to the Israeli government to bomb and destroy Gaza.
Palestine Action was founded in order to take direct action to end UK complicity with Israeli apartheid, specifically focused on Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company, who test their weapons on Palestinians, export them to oppressive regimes across the world, and build their weapons here in our towns and cities.
Of course, I'm not an activist within Palestine Action. I've not been involved with as an activist within Palestine Action, but I support their right to protest. I support their right to oppose genocide, and I certainly support their right to do everything they can to disrupt the arms trade. And I think to describe that activity, which is damaging equipment, disrupting transport, doing other things that will make it nigh on impossible, hopefully, for Israel to get their weapons, is not just not terrorism, which of course it isn't, but it's a moral duty to do it.
Now that we know so much more about the arms manufacture in this country, Elbit Systems, which is where the main protest has been, I think, well, that company is supporting what's going on in the occupied territories and in Gaza.
It's a campaign that's focused on trying to stop the genocide. And I, for one, as a Christian and as a priest, I'm totally committed to trying to stop the genocide.
My knowledge of Palestine Action is vicarious. As I say, I'm not a member, but I've met a number of people who are, and I have to say they're just ordinary people. In the main young, but not always. There's quite a lot of older people as well, but they're ordinary people. They're not people with two heads. They're not terrorists. They're not people who are fanatical, dangerous individuals. They are people who simply want to stop what Israel is doing, want to stop the war in Palestine, and want to stop the killing of Palestinian people.
And they found out that the British government was licensing arms that were going to Israel, seemingly to kill innocent Palestinians, including women and children. And they decided to take action.
I think they're a split off from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign that wanted more direct action. So it's a group of basically younger volunteers who have targeted companies that sell weapons to Israel, like Elbit, for instance.
Their attempt is to draw attention to the way in which Israel manufactures arms and is supplied with arms by arms companies in the UK and also through the government.
So there are a number of dedicated individuals who in various ways have undertaken activity to disrupt the arms trade and to damage the weapons that Israel wants to use to kill Palestinian people. They've also damaged some of the machinery that's used to make that weaponry, and they've damaged some of the infrastructure around that process. They also lobby international trade unions to try and stop things being sent to Israel. So some dockers have been persuaded by Palestine Action not to take goods that are destined for the Israeli persecution of the Palestinian people.
I didn't know very much about them until the prescription itself, if I'm honest, and I've certainly never met anyone from it. I became aware through the media coverage that they've been involved in actions against Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli defence firm that has offices in Bristol, amongst, I think, possibly in other places in Britain. And also, of course, for the very famous incident where they sprayed paint on the RAF planes. Some people would say, well, that's criminal damage, they shouldn't do that. There's actually a very long tradition in Christianity of that kind of peaceful direct action to highlight the use of weapons of war to inflict terror on civilians. The ploughshares movement in the United States coming particularly to mind.
Direct action has a long history, both in the UK and in different parts of the world. So in the UK, one sort of obvious example would be the suffragettes. The suffragettes carried out lots of direct action.
And they were very violent. I am not. I support non-violent direct action. But it took the suffragettes quite a long time, but it got us the vote.
Without direct action, without protest, without holding the government to account, women may not have the rights they have today. I mean, the suffragettes at the time were hated. They were a hated group by the general public. But over time, obviously, they have been seen for the wonderful group they were in bringing about real change.
So what you have to be, if you want anything positive to emerge, is more disruptive.
It's what people realise throughout the generations, that actually there comes a point when, in order to pursue justice, truth, you have to act in a strong way. So Palestine Action took a similar move, that in order to actually combat the arms supply to the Israeli state, the complicity of the British government in the constant oppression of the Palestinians over the years, that you had to take direct action.
Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary at the time, the impetus for her to make Palestine Action a terrorist organisation was when two people went on scooters. They went on scooters into Brize Norton in Oxfordshire, and they threw paint into the turbines of warplanes, essentially.
The Prime Minister has condemned pro-Palestinian activists who sparked a serious security alert when they broke into RAF Brize Norton and vandalised military aircraft. Sir Keir Starmer said the act of vandalism was disgraceful.
We do understand now that a full security review is underway, and that's because last night 2 activists from the group Palestine Action managed to breach the perimeter fence here, use electric scooters to get up close to 2 of these planes, where they then sprayed red paint into their engines in an effort to disable them. Not only that, Lucrezia, they then managed to leave the airbase undetected.
Yeah, it was the Brize Norton thing, I think. Probably lots of pressure from Zionist elements within the British state.
Well, planes regularly depart from here to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, from where the British military conducts its operations in the Middle East. That has included reconnaissance flights over the Gaza Strip. And Palestine Action say those flights are in support of Israel, which they believe is committing a genocide there.
And for that, the government, Yvette Cooper specifically, designated them as terrorists. And anybody, therefore, who supported them was equally designated as terrorists.
This is not about the lawful right to protest. There are many ways for people to protest, to say their views, and there's also a lot of people who feel rightly, very strongly about some of the appalling scenes we've seen happening in Gaza and the West Bank. But this is about whether there's action against our national security in the UK, where we have to have proper safeguards in place.
The prescription of an organisation means that that organisation is no longer able to operate safely as a free entity within the public domain. So if you prescribe an organisation, you cannot recruit for it, you cannot raise money for it, you cannot protest on behalf of it.
As far as I knew, they didn't fit the definition of terrorism at all. These young people whose hearts are in the right place, who want to stop a genocide.
I think they were wrongly prescribed, and I really can't understand why that happened.
The way that this was got through Parliament, in a very sneaky move by Keir Starmer and his colleagues, was that one other, I think possibly two other very extreme organisations indeed, very violent organisations, advocating violence very clearly against human beings, were prescribed simultaneously.
She put together 3 groups that had to be prescribed or not prescribed.
When the government decided to proscribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, along with 2 other organisations, one of which was called the Maniacs Murder Cult.
The title of that, you don't really say anything more than that, maniac murderers, murder cult. And the second one was a white supremacist from like the Russian Imperial group.
Both of them absolutely terrorist organisations, without a doubt, meaning that they attack people.
So along with them, Palestine Action was prescribed and the government got it through on that basis, even though Palestine Action has a far greater specific weight and support in the population than both those organisations put together.
And so the Parliament had to either prescribe them all or none.
The manipulation here was to present MPs with this package deal. So they were asked to vote on proscribing these 3 organisations.
So it was very, very underhand way of doing it, because if they'd been looked at separately, I can't imagine that anybody would have prescribed Palestine Action.
Many MPs now, I think, would say that they wouldn't vote in favour because of Palestine Action is not of the same ilk at all.
As Madam Deputy Speaker knows, every single person who just voted no wanted to vote yes to the description of the Maniacs Murder Cult and the Russian Imperial Movement, but were prevented from doing so by the cynical way that the government lumped together these 2 clearly terrorist organisations with Palestine Action, which we could not support.
Now, of course, Palestine Action does a lot of damage, and the people involved would rightly be tried for criminal damage if they come to court.
The actions that have been carried out by the prescribed organisation led those people to be open to charges under several different counts of criminal law anyway. It didn't need to be prescribed under terrorism legislation. They took responsibility for their actions. They were prepared to be arrested for them.
I mean, if you break into somewhere, if I break into where you live and I damage the house, I'll get done for whatever it is, trespass, all of that. Of course there's laws. But there wasn't a law that meant that me putting up a banner is a terrorist offence.
So I think that the actions that they did, which they accepted for themselves that they could get arrested for and were prepared to pay the penalty for, that's I don't think that's terrorism. I think that's peaceful direct action. And as I say, they were prepared to face the consequences, which were very severe. Trespassing on a military base, causing criminal damage to military aircraft, causing damage to an office of a firm. All those things can carry prison sentences, and they were happy to accept that as the price of standing up for conscience. So I think that is a reasonable thing for them to have done, and to use the legislation in this way, particularly when it was said, when Jack Straw and others started introducing it, that it would never be used in this way.
Would my honourable friend care to take account of those people who commit violence against property, serious violence against property, not with a view to destroying life, but with a view to saving life, such as those women who attacked the Hawk aircraft with hammers, and some of them were acquitted, and the Trident Ploughshare 2000 organisation, which attacks the Trident submarine to save life, not to destroy it. They may be right, they may be wrong, we may have lots of discussion about that, but are they terrorists?
Tomorrow morning I'm in the Middlesex court defending a woman who put some graffiti outside the House of Commons against nuclear weapons, a very courageous woman. I've known her for years. Now, if you define the damage to property as terrorism, that woman could be a terrorist.
The new definition
will not catch the vast majority of so-called domestic activist groups which exist in this country today. I know of no evidence whatever that Greenpeace is involved in any activity which would remotely fall within the scope of this legislation.
If I was a supporter of Greenpeace, which I am not, or Friends of the Earth, which I am not, and I had it in mind to grub up a field of GM crops or set fire to them, I would in fact say of that act, it is serious violence to property. Now, in respect of all of those characters and individuals, I disapprove of them very strongly. And I'm glad to say that the existing criminal law, in almost every respect, covers their activity. But if I ask myself the question, should they be treated as terrorists, I'm bound to say, no way.
Examples of the kind which the right honourable gentleman raises are easy to invent, but in practice, I just say this to the right honourable gentleman, in practice what we're talking about is threats of serious violence. Of course there is a fine dividing line.
Supposing there was a very major defence contract worth billions of pounds over a large number of years, and let us say a government in the Middle East was exerting pressure on the British government that if they wanted that contract, there would be an expectation that action should be brought against a militant group which may be active in London in terms of conspiring and drawing together the international campaign. I mean, does my honourable friend not believe or foresee circumstances, certainly not under a Labour government, but perhaps under other governments in the future, where that kind of pressure could pay off?
I genuinely don't believe that would happen. And the reason for that is because the decisions about prosecution, let us assume for a moment that holders of my office, regardless of party, are completely venal and only have an interest in securing this defence contract and no other interest. Let us make that assumption. It would not be a holder of my office or any member of the government who would make the decision about prosecution.
Jack Straw, when he introduced amendments to the Terrorism Act in 2000, said it would never ever be used against domestic protest groups, or particularly against groups that were involved in peaceful direct action. And that's exactly what happened, exactly what was predicted by people, that once this kind of legislation exists, it's very easy to just label a group or prescribe a group as being a terrorist organisation, and then that has a chilling effect on people's freedom to protest, freedom to object actually to decisions made by the government and to call them into question.
Now though, 6:08, here's Charlotte with the rest of the day's news.
Thanks very much. Hello, good morning. The Justice Secretary, David Lammy, is considering scrapping trial by juries, an ancient right that's said to date back to the Magna Carta more than 800 years ago.
Well, that's right, Charlotte, and it certainly is, if it happens, a huge deal. It's unlikely to be a big announcement today because, of course, as Louisa just said, there's quite a lot going on in government already.
It's a bit busy, isn't it? Lisa, Katie, thanks very much for that.
In a sense, the more important part of this has been the desire to call attention to the fact that our civil liberties are being eroded.
Well, there does seem to have been a tightening and erosion of rights to protest since 2000 over the last 20 years.
First of all, that Palestine Action itself should be deemed to be a terrorist organisation, like people like Al-Qaeda that cut people's heads off and things, when they are totally focused on the weapons being sold to fuel the genocide in Gaza.
It's such a ridiculous use of legislation, the Terrorism Act. I think people holding placards are not committing an act of terrorism, the consequence of which of being found of charged under that and convicted under that would be quite serious.
And so this is a huge part of it. We're saying we must stand up for our freedom of expression, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to call attention to evil and the complicity of the government. All this is essential and it's part of being a member of a democratic state, and this is being eroded. So That's why I think all of us have signed up to this and feel that this is the right thing to have done.
I think the government overreacted horrendously because clearly all of those of us who have been arrested are certainly not terrorists. And I don't think Palestine Action can be described as such.
I'm extremely disturbed, of course, by the way in which the governments, both left and right, have begun to crack down on peaceful protest. I mean, it is our... what other means have we got to influence government policy?
I think we're heading for the shutdown of democratic rights in this country. I think the right to protest is what's given people the rights and freedoms that we have today. It's been incredibly important in our history, people fighting for a decent working time, decent wages, the rights for women to have the vote, and the idea that we should be shutting down the possibility of protest against injustice, against, in this case, a genocide. If you can't protest against a genocide, democracy is finished.
I think it is, an important principle that has been fought for in wars and in other contexts to have freedom of speech. Our trade union movement fought for freedom of speech. The Enclosure Acts were defeated by the trade union movement. We had the Tolpuddle martyrs. We've had all sorts of attempts to stop people from using free speech. We are not about to let that be taken away from us. So we have to resist, because if we don't succeed on this occasion, they'll be coming after other people next time.
All people who seem to get their hands on power seem to want to repress anyone who thinks differently.
The government has been absolutely determined to do what it can without bringing down more opprobrium on its head than it can cope with, to restrict the ability of people to protest.
So democracy, yeah, as long as you do what you're told.
This is our fundamental human right to be able to say that we disapprove of what's happening. And people will risk arrest, risk losing their liberty.
There's no doubt that we're shifting towards a much more authoritarian way of attempting to govern the country.
I don't know whether the government panicked or what they thought this was going to lead to, or if they thought it was some kind of threat to them. But I can but repeat, I thought their response was totally disproportionate, unreasonable.
If the government is allowed to get away with it, there then is no restriction on the limiting of the rights to freedom of expression.
The public order bills that have gone through Parliament in the last 4 years have progressively taken away the ability of ordinary people to get on the streets and make their views known when they don't agree with what the government is doing. And that is what I wanted to make a statement about.
My final right in my life is always the right to say no. And I insist on that right, and I will fight it. I will fight it for the rest of my life to the best of my ability.
Now they're saying that no marches may be banned if they occur repeatedly in the same area. Now, there's no point in having a national march in London if it isn't in the central area. So this gives them a complete, if they wish to, and I think they will, the right to say you can have one march, you can have a march in, let's say, January, but then you can't have any other marches indefinitely. And there are no protest movements that have ever grown and had an effect based on one march. You need to keep the pressure up.
How are you planning to curb these protests then? What are you going to do? I'm specifically going to amend parts of the Public Order Act that will enable the police to place greater restrictions and conditions on protests based explicitly on what we call cumulative disruption. That is to say, regular protests by often the same group of people, often in the same place. So I want to make explicit in the law that those types of protests with cumulative disruption for communities can attract the same conditions and restrictions that apply to other types of protests, so that the police have absolute clarity that they can use cumulative disruption as a reason for restricting those protests.
And those protests in support of Gazans have been taking place regularly. They have been taking place often in the same sites in our city centres. So do you want to be candid about this and just say you are giving the police the power to ban those particular protests? That's the brass tacks of what you're saying.
So this is not about a ban, this is about restrictions and conditions.
We have actions from the British government not just describing Palestine Action as terrorists, but also saying that other political activities need to be stopped, so that repeat demonstrations, whatever that means, are to be banned by the police. That's now going to become, if the government gets its way, the legal position, so that the police can say, well, you've already had a demonstration this month, we know what you think, you can't have another one.
You can give your views one day, but that's it. That's enough. You can't repeat it on the next weekend.
Just because you have a freedom doesn't mean to say you have to use it at every moment of every day.
If the government is successful in its punitive attempts to clamp down on demonstrations, repeated demonstrations, as they put it, then those people who will suffer are not solely those who are demonstrating in support of Palestine Action, but it'll be disabled people, trade unionists, lesbians and gay men. We will be clamped down on people who are demonstrating against racism. There's a whole shift now to the right being led by our government at the moment and being pushed along by Reform and others, I would say. And this is part of that attack. It is not a separate issue. They are attempting to silence opposition and silence debate.
Our Labour government now is benefiting from legislation that brought in by the Tory government, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel. And it's absolutely well known, isn't it, that when a government gets certain powers, the next government doesn't give them up.
My fear is that if it isn't overturned, we're heading to severe oppression towards an authoritarian state, which will then be taken up if we shift in the next election towards Reform UK, an extreme right-wing government. They will add repression on repression.
The trend that's so obvious is that dissent is being criminalised, and the government of both sides, the Tory government and this Labour government that we have now, are becoming more authoritarian.
It seems to me that Labour is laying the way, laying the path, if you like, for any future right-wing government that wants to seek to legitimise suppression and oppression. So the fact that the Labour Party, the supposed party of working class people, is leading the way in banning demonstrations, in banning groups like Palestine Action, in calling people terrorists who have different opinions to them, is an extremely dangerous precedent. Because if in the future we are faced with a Farage-led government with their bully boys like Yaxley Lennon out there on the streets backing them up, there is every certainty, I would say, that the precedent set by Starmer and his colleagues will be used with relish by Farage and his colleagues to legitimise suppression of political opposition.
Breaking news now. Digital ID will be made law for all adults.
It's something that the UK has always resisted, partly because of questions around civil liberties and freedoms, but also because many governments in previous times said they didn't think it was the best approach. Now, clearly, Keir Starmer has been persuaded of the benefits of a digital ID card system.
The main argument that people historically had against identity cards was that somehow it would allow the state to, track us, follow us, control us in all sorts of potentially pernicious ways. Do I think that broadly an equivalent sort of, essentially bit of identity that happens to have the state's branding on it would attract quite the same essentially concerns about civil liberties as was the case 15, 20 years ago? No, I don't think that.
Well, I feel privileged to have been part of a movement that has been a very spontaneous response, I think, to the action of the government in proscribing Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation.
I'm a 62-year-old, totally blind adult who uses a wheelchair to get more than 15 yards, who is partial hearing in my right ear and partial hearing in my left ear. I've got various other underlying conditions, like I've got lymphedema, and I'm not going to go through my medical background because it's not the point. But the reason I'm doing that is not to show that I'm vulnerable, because I'm certainly not. But equally, I think it is quite unlikely that I could be carrying out acts of terrorism.
I'm not a terrorist. I mean, look at me. I'm not a terrorist. I'm an ageing woman who, I'm non-violent. I hate watching violence on TV. I don't watch it. I can't bear it. And to be called a terrorist is insulting. Absolutely insulting to be called a terrorist when I'm not. I'm clearly not. And it's a lie. I'm not a terrorist.
The people I feel are impacted, and hugely, and that is the young, who put their careers on the line, and sometimes those who put their health on the line. And it gives you an idea of just how totally committed these people are to take action, even though it impacts their lives, and sometimes quite seriously.
I'm very lucky being at this stage in my life that I'm not going to suffer that much. I don't want to go to prison. I think it's unlikely as a result of these protests that I'll go to prison. If I do go to prison, I will have paid a high price. But I've weighed up the risks. I think that's unlikely. But it has to be a risk I'm willing to pay, and you have to understand that when you weigh up the risks, face them squarely, understand what the risks are, and then still do it because it's right.
Feel outrage. Vote genociders out at every level of election. Join the Palestinian movement. Carry out as best you can a boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel, and link up as part of the worldwide movement of resistance.
My sense of what I could do would be just to get out there and hold the placard. And I didn't really expect that it would lead to someone like me and others like me, many others like me, my age and with my background, really running the risk of being labelled permanently as a terrorist. But now I think that I was probably wrong about that.
Frankly, I'm 62 now. I don't know how long I'm going to live. My health is not great. And, I've had my life. And for me as a socialist, the most important thing in the world, really, is to defend people's right to live independently and freely in their societies. The right to a home, the right to food, the right to education, All of these things are fundamental, and they should be fundamental human rights.
So many people around here in my own congregation also were saying how helpless and powerless they felt, and then the banning of the prescribing of the organisation, which just seemed like a completely knee-jerk and ridiculous use of terrorism legislation. I thought if there's one time that someone wearing a dog collar might have more impact, that would be it. So I thought this is just something I have to do. It's a very kind of a personal thing that didn't bring it didn't bring any kind of disrepute on my congregations or anything, but it was something that I could do and make a public statement.
God calls us to speak the truth and to stand up for justice in all situations, and to call out the evils of oppression.
We've got to make sure that we continue to be allowed to say what we think. It's a cornerstone of any democracy, and it's when democracies are failing, we have to have the right. We have to stand up and be counted.
You're probably well aware of the old saying, they came for the trade unionists and I didn't say anything because I'm not a trade unionist. They came for the priests and I didn't say anything because I'm not religious, And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. So I feel we have to do what we can.
Oh, it was definitely worth it. It had to be done. I knew there was a risk that I could be suspended from my post as an active serving parish priest in the church. If I'm convicted under the Terrorism Act, that could have consequences for my role as a parish priest. I might not be able to function as one anymore. So there could be consequences to it, but I took the action in full awareness of that and would be prepared to pay that price. I don't think that I'm above the law. If I've broken the law, then I should be, I should be treated with due process under the law. But I think when the law's wrong, we have to take a stand to make that point clear.
If it hasn't made any difference at all, I mean, there was this saying that, what can I do? Says 8 million other people. You individually have very little, don't have much power. But if everybody together, I mean, that's why the sittings have been so successful. The 2,000 people have come together and sat and made a statement, made a point, and they have to be heard.
Well, I've been publicly out, as it were, as a supporter of Palestine and critic of Israel now for rather over 20 years. There are some members of my family that no longer talk to me. They don't respond to my emails. I even have relatives in Israel who are not very happy with me. But actually, so what? I'm sorry that they feel like that. I would love to be in touch with them. But I'm also part of a larger family of people who I admire and love, who I take a principled stand on this, as well as being Jewish.
I really not only feel it's a duty laid on all of us, but I actually want to try and create a better world in my tiny and sort of ineffective way, actually. But we do what we can, don't we?
I don't think I've got any choice. I think I have to go out there and do what little I can to win this battle. And we are going to win it, by the way. It's not a question of whether we'll win. The difficulty is how soon. It's not about whether we're in the right. We are definitely on the right side of history. I'm in absolutely no doubt about that.